My name is Ethan, and I am 27 years old. Just 3 weeks ago, I stood in the polished marble lobby of my corporate accounting firm, holding a single brown manila envelope that was about to completely destroy my entire family. While I was trying to build my career, pay off my own debts, and secure an honest future, my parents looked me dead in the eye and told me I was nothing but a paycheck to them. They demanded I hand over nearly half my salary to fund my 30-year-old brother's delusional, unemployed influencer lifestyle. They actually screamed at me right there in the lobby, in front of the receptionist and my colleagues, calling me a selfish, ungrateful son who was abandoning his blood. But there was one thing they didn't know. The envelope in my hand contained a freshly filed police report and a forensic accounting trail exposing the massive real estate fraud they had committed using my name and my social security number. And right now, the very people who treated me like dirt for over 2 decades are begging me not to send them to federal prison. Before I tell you exactly what happened and how I brought their entire house of cards crashing down, hit the like button if you believe that justice should always prevail, no matter who the abuser is. And please, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. I read every single one, and it helps to know I am not alone in this. Now, let's go back to where this absolute nightmare began. Let me paint a picture of the exact moment I realized my family was fundamentally broken beyond any hope of repair. We were standing in the high-end, glass-walled lobby of Sterling Financial. Outside, it was a crisp, bright Tuesday morning in downtown, the kind of morning where normal people were grabbing their coffees and heading into work to earn an honest living. Inside the lobby, it was sheer, unadulterated chaos, and the spectacle was entirely centered on me. My father, Arthur, was red in the face, sweating profusely through his cheap golf polo, aggressively pointing his thick finger at my chest. He was a man who believed volume equaled authority. If he shouted loud enough, reality would simply bend to his will. My mother, Martha, was doing what she always did best. She was playing the helpless, victimized matriarch, clutching her designer knockoff purse with white knuckles, and loudly weeping so that everyone in the building would look at her with deep sympathy. She wanted the audience. She thrived on it. And standing just behind them, entirely unbothered by the humiliation of his parents causing a public disturbance, was my older brother, Julian. He was filming the entire confrontation on his phone, holding it at a high angle to capture his own face reacting to the drama. Julian is 30 years old. He has never held a real job for more than 6 consecutive months. He calls himself a visionary crypto entrepreneur and a high-value lifestyle influencer. In reality, he is a grown man who lives absolutely rent-free in our parents' sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house, eating organic, imported groceries paid for entirely by me, while he waits for his magical big break to happen. The 3 of them had barged into my workplace, bypassing security by claiming a massive family emergency, because they realized their personal walking ATM had suddenly shut down. They thought they could embarrass me into submission. That was always their primary tactic. They thought that because I had always been the quiet, obedient, rule-following younger son, I would crumble the second they made a public scene. They assumed I would just pull out my phone, transfer the money into their account, apologize profusely for my rebellion, and go back to being their financial doormat just to avoid the humiliation of a public screaming match in front of my peers. They were profoundly wrong. As my father yelled about family obligations and my mother wailed about how I was breaking her fragile heart and ruining the family reputation, I just stood there. I didn't shake. I didn't lower my eyes to the floor like I used to when I was a teenager. I felt a strange, icy calm wash over my entire body. I looked at the 3 people who were supposedly meant to love, nurture, and protect me, and I realized I felt absolutely nothing for them anymore. The emotional well was entirely dry. The tension in that lobby felt worse than the bitterest divorce proceeding you could ever imagine. I held up the brown envelope. It wasn't heavy, just a few sheets of standard printer paper, but it held the weight of a nuclear bomb. I watched my father's eyes dart toward it, tracking the movement. I watched my mother's fake, theatrical tears stop for a split second as confusion briefly broke through her victim act. They had absolutely no idea the sheer magnitude of the evidence I had secured inside that flimsy piece of paper. They had no idea I had spent the last 72 hours auditing my own family with the ruthless, cold precision of a senior financial analyst preparing for a massive corporate lawsuit. But to truly understand how we ended up in that corporate lobby, to comprehend the sheer, breathtaking audacity of what they did to me, you have to understand the environment I survived for 27 years. You have to understand the slow, suffocating, daily reality of being the invisible workhorse in a family that only worships the golden child. You have to understand the mathematics of emotional abuse. I lived in the dining room. I want you to really process that statement for a second. Let it sink in. I am a 27-year-old senior financial auditor. I make a very comfortable salary, one that puts me in a strong tax bracket. I have zero consumer debt, a perfect credit score, and a solid career trajectory. And yet, my bedroom was a sectioned off, poorly lit corner of my parents' dining room in their oversized Connecticut suburban home. When people at work found out I still lived at home, they usually made wild assumptions. They assumed I was aggressively saving for a massive down payment on my own real estate property. Or maybe they thought I was paying off a mountain of student loans, or building a robust college fund for a future child. Some even thought I was staying home to act as a caretaker for ailing parents. None of that was remotely true. I lived at home because I was trapped in a financial and emotional hostage situation that I had been slowly conditioned to accept as my normal reality since I was a child. Every single month, on the first day of the month, I transferred exactly $900 into my parents' joint checking account. They aggressively labeled it as rent. But it wasn't rent. Rent implies a mutual contract. Rent comes with a door that locks to keep the world out. Rent comes with basic privacy and tenant rights. I had none of those things. My personal sanctuary consisted of a massive, heavy mahogany table that served as my desk, a rigid, high-backed antique chair that dug into my spine and ruined my posture during 10-hour work shifts, and a flimsy, decorative folding screen that offered absolutely zero soundproofing from the rest of the house. Meanwhile, Julian occupied the massive master bedroom upstairs. He had completely manipulated my parents 2 years ago into giving up their own bedroom, convincing them that he desperately needed the extra square footage for his content creation studio and lighting equipment. He didn't pay a single dime in rent. He didn't pay for his own groceries. He didn't even pay for his own car insurance or phone bill. Everything Julian did, no matter how lazy or unproductive, was framed as a crucial investment in his unlimited potential. Everything I did, no matter how hard I worked, was framed as a basic obligation to the family unit. My parents' entire world, their daily schedule, their financial decisions, all revolved around keeping Julian comfortable and happy. If Julian decided he needed a new $2,000 camera lens for his vlogs, my father would dip into his retirement savings without a second thought. If Julian demanded grass-fed, ethically sourced beef and imported spring water for his strict influencer fitness diet, my mother would drive 40 minutes across town to the specialty market, putting the exorbitant grocery bill on a high-interest credit card that she fully expected me to pay off at the end of the month. And then there was Aunt Susan. My mother's younger sister was a constant, looming presence in our house, always hovering around the kitchen island, always offering toxic advice dressed up as folksy wisdom. She knew exactly how unfair the dynamic was. She watched me pay the bills while Julian slept until noon. Sometimes, when my parents were out running errands for Julian, she would pull up a chair next to my makeshift dining room desk, pat my shoulder with a patronizing smile, and say things to keep me chained to the floor. "You are so remarkably strong, Ethan," Susan would say, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Your parents rely on you so much. You are the rock of this family. Julian is just a late bloomer. He is finding his creative path in a difficult world. You have to be the bigger person and carry the weight. Family is everything, Ethan. Blood is thicker than water." I used to believe her garbage. I used to think my endless endurance and financial bleeding was a sign of strong moral character. I thought if I just paid enough bills, fixed enough broken appliances, funded enough grocery runs, and kept my head down, my parents would eventually look at me with the same sheer adoration and respect they reserved for Julian. I thought I was paying off a debt for the gift of being born. I was trying to buy their love on a monthly installment plan, But love is not a subscription service you can purchase. The financial drain on my accounts was relentless and constant. Last summer, our electric bill tripled out of nowhere. The homeowners association started sending angry warning letters about a horrible, industrial humming noise coming from our attached garage. Julian had decided, in his infinite wisdom, to get into crypto mining. He bought 3 massive, power-hungry server rigs, running them 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They generated a horrible, bone-rattling humming noise and enough heat to bake the entire first floor of the house. When the $600 power bill arrived in the mail, my father didn't ask Julian to cover his business expenses. He silently slid the envelope across the kitchen table to me while I was eating my cheap cereal. I paid it. I always paid it. I was the safety net that never broke. But the final breaking point, the moment the illusion completely shattered, didn't happen over money. It happened over basic human dignity. It was a Wednesday morning. I had a massive, career-defining Zoom presentation scheduled for 10 o'clock sharp. I was pitching a newly developed risk assessment model directly to our company CEO, Mr. Sterling, and a panel of senior executives. Getting direct FaceTime with Mr. Sterling was incredibly rare for someone at my level, and this presentation was my golden ticket to secure a major promotion to senior management. I had prepared for weeks. I had my background blurred digitally to hide the dining room, my noise-canceling headphones firmly over my ears, and my voice was steady. I was deep in the zone, speaking confidently about quarterly efficiency projections and risk mitigation. My primary rival at work, a guy named Liam, was also on the call. Liam was the kind of corporate climber who always looked down on me. He wore expensive, tailored suits, drove a sleek German car, and made sure everyone in the office knew he lived in a luxury downtown loft with skyline views. He was constantly waiting for me to slip up so he could steal the promotion. Right in the middle of my most critical slide, the front door of the house slammed open with such force that the walls literally shook. Julian stomped into the hallway, talking incredibly loudly on his phone about brand synergy and massive networking opportunities. He didn't just walk past my workspace. He intentionally stomped right past the folding screen, stepping directly into the bright frame of my webcam. Panicked, I quickly muted my microphone, maintaining a tight, forced, professional smile for the executives staring at me through the screen, and waved my hand frantically at Julian, silently begging him to move out of the frame. Julian completely ignored my desperate signals. He pulled a set of heavy car keys out of the pocket of his designer sweatpants and threw them directly at my chest with a hard flick of his wrist. They hit my collarbone sharply and clattered loudly onto my laptop keyboard. "Move your garbage sedan," Julian demanded, his booming voice easily picking up on my microphone even though I tried to mute it in time. "I rented a Porsche for a lifestyle shoot today, and your piece of junk is ruining the aesthetic of the driveway. I need the natural lighting. Do it right now, Ethan. The sun is shifting." I froze. Time completely stopped. On the screen, Mr. Sterling stopped taking notes, his brow furrowing in deep confusion. Liam's camera feed showed him physically covering his mouth with his hand to hide a massive, arrogant, highly satisfied smirk. The other executives looked away, visibly uncomfortable with the domestic intrusion. I unmuted myself, my face burning with a humiliation so deep it felt like physical, searing pain. I apologized profusely to the executives, stammering out a lie about an immediate, unavoidable household emergency. I had to abandon the biggest, most important meeting of my professional life, stand up from my desk, and go outside in the freezing cold to move my 10-year-old Honda so my unemployed brother could take fake pictures sitting on the hood of a luxury sports car he didn't own and couldn't afford. When I finally rushed back inside and logged back into the meeting portal 10 minutes later, the room was empty. The meeting was over. My inbox chimed. It was a single, brief email from Mr. Sterling's executive assistant suggesting we reschedule the presentation for a later date when I could secure a more professional, reliable working environment. Below that email was a passive-aggressive message in the team chat from Liam, asking in front of everyone if I needed him to help me find a quiet coffee shop with free Wi-Fi so I wouldn't be interrupted by my family again. I sat at that mahogany dining room table, staring at the glowing screen of my laptop, and something deep inside my chest simply snapped. The lock turned. The illusion broke into a million unfixable pieces. I wasn't a supportive son. I wasn't the rock of the family. I was a hostage. I was an indentured servant. And the ransom they were demanding was my self-respect, my career, and my entire future. The very next day, I was sitting at my desk at the corporate office, trying to salvage the damage done to my reputation from the disastrous Zoom call, when my phone vibrated aggressively on the desk. It was a text message from my mother. There was no greeting. There was no asking how my ruined presentation went, or if my boss was angry. It was just a cold, clinical, calculated demand. Your father and I have thoroughly reviewed the household budget. Given Julian's upcoming rebranding phase and the rising cost of his dietary needs, household costs are rising significantly. Effective immediately, your monthly rent contribution to the family will be $1,600. $1,600. That was a massive $700 increase, delivered casually via a text message, for the grand privilege of sleeping in a room without a door and having car keys thrown at my face. I didn't reply to the text. I closed my laptop, packed my briefcase, drove home through the heavy evening traffic, and walked into a house that suddenly felt entirely different. The air inside the Colonial was thick, suffocating, heavily pressurized. My parents were sitting at the kitchen table, their hands folded neatly in front of them, waiting for me like a disciplinary committee ready to hand down a sentence. They had set up a literal family court. Julian was lounging horizontally on the expensive living room sofa in the next room, pretending to scroll aimlessly on his phone, but the volume on his video was completely muted. He was listening to every single word, waiting for the show to begin. I stood in the doorway leading to the kitchen. I absolutely refused to sit down at the table with them. $1,600, I stated, my voice completely flat, completely devoid of the usual anxiety I felt around them. That is almost double what I pay right now. For a dining room, for a space where I can't even conduct a business meeting without being humiliated. My father adjusted his reading glasses, firmly refusing to make direct eye contact with me. He looked at a spot on the wall just above my left shoulder. Costs have gone up across the board, Ethan. Groceries are outrageous, utilities are sky-high, property taxes are killing us. And Julian needs to invest heavily in his brand this quarter. He needs premium server space, professional editing software, better equipment. We are a family unit. We support each other in times of growth. I do support you, I corrected him, keeping my tone deadly even. I pay the massive electric bill for his ridiculous crypto miners that yield nothing. I buy the expensive, organic groceries he eats every single day. I pay the upgraded internet bill. You want me to hand over nearly half my take-home salary so he can rent more luxury Porsche cars for fake Instagram photos while I sleep on a folding cot in the dining room. How dare you speak to us like that? My father barked, suddenly slamming his heavy fist onto the wooden table. The coffee mugs rattled violently. It was a sudden, aggressive, physical gesture designed specifically to make me flinch, to remind me of his physical dominance. After everything we have given you, we put a solid roof over your head. We fed you. We raised you. This is how you repay our years of sacrifice. With this disgusting, calculated selfishness? With greed? My mother instantly chimed in on cue, her voice going shrill and trembling with highly practiced, fake emotion. You are so incredibly ungrateful, Ethan. You make good money at that fancy firm of yours. Why do you have to be so greedy with your own flesh and blood? Why can't you just help your older brother when he needs you most? Family requires sacrifice, Ethan. It requires giving until it hurts. From the living room, Julian let out a short, sharp, mocking laugh. Told you he was a stingy cheapskate, he called out, his voice dripping with condescension. I looked at my father's red, angry, pulsing face. I looked at my mother's manipulative, weaponized tears forming perfectly in the corners of her eyes. For 27 years, this exact, synchronized combination of intense guilt and explosive rage had kept me perfectly in line. Whenever they pulled this specific routine, I would panic internally. I would immediately apologize for being selfish. I would open my wallet, write the check, and hand over my peace of mind just to restore the fragile equilibrium of the household. But tonight, the invisible script we had followed for decades had completely changed. I looked at them, and I didn't see my parents anymore. I saw a parasitic, failing system desperately trying to protect its primary host. In behavioral psychology, there is a specific phenomenon known as an extinction burst. It happens when a toxic person or a manipulator realizes that their usual tactics, the yelling, the guilt-tripping, the physical intimidation, are absolutely no longer working on their victim. Instead of accepting the new boundary, they aggressively escalate the abuse. They scream louder, they push harder, they become completely unhinged, desperate to force the old, comfortable system back into place. They weren't furiously angry because I was being unreasonable. They were absolutely terrified because the ATM was finally asking for a receipt. They knew deep down that, without my constant financial compliance, their entire house of cards would collapse instantly. I am not sacrificing my financial future, my career, and my sanity so Julian can play pretend influencer on the internet, I said quietly, the volume of my voice contrasting sharply with their yelling. My father stood up rapidly, knocking his heavy wooden chair back onto the floor with a loud crash. You will pay the $1,600 on the first of the month, or you can pack your bags and get out of my house tonight, he roared, pointing toward the front door. It was an entirely empty threat. He knew perfectly well I had nowhere else to go on a random Thursday night. He fully believed the sheer terror of sudden homelessness would break my resolve and force me back into submission. I didn't argue with his logic. I didn't raise my voice to match his. I didn't defend my position or point out the blatant hypocrisy of Julian living there for free. I just looked at him, nodded my head slowly, and said one single, terrifying word. Okay. My mother blinked rapidly, totally thrown off balance by my sudden, calm capitulation. The tears stopped instantly. Okay? She repeated, her voice laced with sudden uncertainty. Okay? I said again, my voice smooth as glass. I turned my back to them, walked down the hallway, and walked right out the front door into the cold night air. I needed space to breathe. I got into my old sedan, drove a few miles away, and pulled over in a desolate, poorly lit strip mall parking lot. My chest was tight, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned bright white. I needed someone to talk to, someone who intimately understood the twisted family dynamic but could perhaps offer some objective comfort or mediation. In a moment of lingering weakness, I made a massive, critical mistake. I called Aunt Susan. She picked up on the second ring. I poured my heart out into the phone. I told her in detail about the ruined corporate meeting, the Porsche keys thrown at my face, the cold text message, the insane, extortion-level demand for $1,600 in rent. I expected her to finally drop the act and agree that my parents had finally gone way too far, that this was financial abuse. Instead, the warm, folksy tone completely vanished from her voice. Her voice dropped to a cold, harsh, deeply serious whisper that chilled me to the bone. Ethan, you need to stop being so incredibly dramatic and just pay the damn money. I froze in the driver's seat. What did you just say to me? Listen to me very carefully, Aunt Susan hissed through the speaker. Your parents are under an incredible amount of stress right now. Julian isn't just rebranding his channel. He's in trouble, Ethan. Big, serious trouble. They desperately need that specific amount of money to cover some very serious, very private legal expenses. You make a great salary. Stop complaining like a child and step up for your family. If you don't pay this money immediately, you are going to completely destroy your parents' lives. Before I could ask a single follow-up question, she abruptly hung up on me. The line went dead. I sat alone in the dark, freezing car, listening to the absolute silence of the empty parking lot. My own aunt, the woman who had played the sympathetic, understanding listener for years, was deeply entrenched in the machinery of my abuse. She wasn't a secret ally. She was the warden helping to keep me locked in the financial cell. And her sudden slip of the tongue, mentioning Julian being in big, serious trouble and private legal expenses, sparked a massive, brilliant fire in my analytical brain. I wasn't just a discarded, unloved son anymore. I was an aggressive corporate auditor who had just caught the faint, undeniable scent of cooked books. I put the car in drive, and the quiet, obedient, suffering Ethan died permanently right there in that parking lot. The next 3 days were a masterclass in silent, calculated warfare. I didn't pack my bags that night. Packing bags makes noise. Packing signals intent. It gives the enemy time to react, to block the door, to steal my laptop, or to manipulate me further. Instead, I went to work on Friday morning acting as if absolutely nothing had happened. I was pleasant, I was compliant, I was invisible. The moment I got to the office, I pulled my best friend and closest colleague, Marcus, into an empty, soundproof conference room. Marcus knew every horrible detail about my living situation. He was the only person in my life who constantly, relentlessly told me I was being abused and needed to escape. I need out. Today. No questions asked. I told him, my voice completely steady. Marcus didn't ask a single question. He didn't hesitate. He immediately pulled out his phone and called a close contact of his, a property manager named Chloe, who ran a newly renovated, highly secure loft building downtown, miles away from my parents' suffocating suburban bubble. By my lunch break, I was touring a secure, one-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor. It had thick, exposed brick walls, heavy deadbolt locks, a modern kitchen, and most importantly, absolute, glorious silence. I signed the 12-month lease right on the hood of Chloe's car in the parking garage, immediately transferring my entire emergency savings fund to cover the first month, last month, and a hefty security deposit. I didn't even wince at the massive deduction from my bank account. Freedom is highly expensive, but the alternative was going to cost me my actual life. The physical move out of my parents' house was a highly coordinated military operation. I couldn't just hire a loud-moving truck. My parents would throw a massive tantrum, physically block the door, call the police and claim I was stealing their property, or violently destroy my belongings. So, I used their own massive vanity and desire for good optics against them. I brought home dozens of empty, flattened cardboard boxes from the corporate office. When my father aggressively asked what I was doing, stepping over a pile of boxes in the hallway, I smiled politely and told him our corporate office was running a massive charity clothing and appliance drive for the upcoming holidays, and I had volunteered to be in charge of gathering donations. My parents beamed with pride, nodding approvingly. They absolutely loved the idea of charity, as long as it made them look good to the neighbors and didn't cost them a single penny of their own money. Over the weekend, while Julian slept off a hangover until noon and my parents went to the country club for their sacred Sunday brunch, I packed. I packed with terrifying speed and efficiency. I packed all my winter clothes, my crucial financial documents, my expensive electronics, my birth certificate, my passport, and every small sentimental item I truly owned. I loaded the heavy boxes into my car, drove them directly to the new downtown apartment, rapidly unloaded them, and brought the empty boxes back to the house to repeat the process. I left the heavy, bulky furniture. I left the ugly antique chair that hurt my back. I left just enough clothes hanging visibly in the closet to make the space look completely untouched at a quick glance. By Sunday night, my section of the dining room looked completely normal, but it was nothing but a hollow, empty movie set. I was already a ghost. On Monday night, I sat cross-legged on the bare hardwood floor of my new, empty living room. I had a mattress on the floor, a single lamp casting a warm glow, and my laptop. I had successfully escaped the physical prison. The extraction was 100% complete. But my mind couldn't rest. The highly analytical side of my brain, the exact side that audits complex corporate ledgers and catches multi-million-dollar discrepancies for a living, kept snagging on one highly specific, deeply irritating detail. $1,600. It was such a ridiculously arbitrary, specific number. If my parents just wanted to bleed me dry out of pure greed, they would have asked for an even $1,500 or pushed for an even $2,000. $1,600 wasn't a random emotional demand pulled out of thin air. It was a calculated mathematical requirement. It was a specific bill that needed to be paid. I opened my laptop. The cool glow of the screen lit up the dark, empty room. I logged into my various bank accounts. Everything was secure, passwords changed, two-factor authentication enabled. Then I accessed the major credit monitoring bureaus. Because I lived at home to save money, I had never taken out a mortgage, and my humble Honda was paid off years ago in cash. My credit score was a pristine, untouched 800. I pulled my comprehensive, detailed credit report, expecting to see absolutely nothing but my single, low-balance credit card and my old, fully paid-off student loans. I scrolled past the clean payment history, past the minimal hard inquiries, and then my stomach completely plummeted to the floor, leaving me breathless. There, sitting like a venomous snake hidden in the middle of the digital page, was an active, massive, secured debt. It was a home equity line of credit. A HELOC. Origination amount, $60,000. Origination date, exactly 3 years ago. Current status, delinquent, 90 days past due. Pre-foreclosure warning active. I stared at the glowing screen, my blood instantly turning to ice in my veins. I had never signed a mortgage document or a HELOC application in my entire life. 3 years ago, I was working 80-hour weeks, studying frantically to pass my final accounting certification exams. I certainly didn't borrow $60,000 against a piece of suburban real estate I didn't even own. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I clicked deeper into the portal, tracing the loan details back to the originating banking institution. It was the exact local branch my parents had used for 30 years. I knew my mother's security questions by heart. She used the same ridiculous password and answers for absolutely everything. I securely logged into the bank's digital document portal and pulled the original, scanned PDF application for the HELOC, and there it was, staring right back at me in black and white. Primary borrower, Arthur. Cosigner, Ethan. I zoomed in heavily on the signature line at the bottom of the digital document. It was a clumsy, shaky, tracing paper forgery of my distinct handwriting. They had intentionally and maliciously used my pristine, perfect credit score to secure a massive loan against their house because their own credit was completely destroyed by years of funding Julian's lifestyle. But where did $60,000 vanish to? Julian's crypto mining rigs were expensive, but they didn't cost 60 grand. I pulled the transaction history on the loan. The money wasn't withdrawn slowly over time. It didn't go to a legitimate business account for a startup. It was wired in one massive single lump sum directly to a prominent, highly expensive criminal defense law firm located in a neighboring city. The puzzle pieces slammed together in my mind with terrifying, absolute clarity. Aunt Susan's panicked words echoed loudly in my head. Julian is in big, serious trouble. Private legal expenses. 3 years ago, Julian had briefly vanished for 2 months on what my parents aggressively marketed to the family as a spiritual retreat in Europe to find himself. He hadn't gone on a retreat. He hadn't left the state. He had been arrested. He had faced serious, heavy felony charges, highly likely tied to his shady, unregulated crypto dealings or some massive fraud scheme, and my parents had stolen my identity, illegally mortgaged their own home, and drained $60,000 of fake equity to buy him a high-powered, ruthless lawyer to keep their precious golden child out of a federal prison cell. And now the money was entirely gone. The grace period had ended. The loan was actively defaulting. I looked at the minimum monthly payment required by the bank to keep them from instantly foreclosing on the colonial house. $1,600. They weren't asking for rent. They weren't asking for grocery money. They were violently trying to force me, through guilt and manipulation, to pay the monthly installment on the massive debt they had fraudulently, illegally taken out in my own name to save the brother who threw car keys at my head. I gently closed the laptop. The silence of my new apartment felt heavy, charged with violent electricity. I wasn't just a tragic victim of toxic parenting anymore. I was the primary victim of a massive federal financial crime. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't feel an ounce of fear. I reached for my cell phone, found the direct, non-emergency number for the local police department's fraud division, and requested an immediate, in-person meeting with a financial crimes detective for the very next morning. The storm wasn't just coming anymore. The storm was already here, and I was going to make absolutely sure it wiped them completely off the map, leaving nothing but scorched earth behind. I thought the absolute worst part was discovering the ultimate betrayal on paper. I was so incredibly, foolishly wrong. The real nightmare was what happened when they realized I knew, and they cornered me at my office to silence me. The morning after I discovered the massive, life-altering real estate fraud committed in my name, I did not go straight to the corporate office. I woke up in my new, silent apartment long before the sun even considered rising over the city skyline. I brewed a pot of incredibly strong black coffee in my pristine, quiet kitchen. I sat at my new counter and spent 2 uninterrupted hours perfectly organizing my evidence. I printed every single digital document, every time-stamped login log, every wire transfer receipt, and the forged home equity line of credit application. I placed them inside a crisp, brown manila envelope. That envelope felt heavier than a brick of solid lead. It contained the complete, undeniable destruction of my entire family unit. At exactly 7 in the morning, I drove my 10-year-old sedan out of the secure parking garage and headed directly to the downtown precinct of the local police department. The air outside was freezing, a bitter, biting cold that perfectly matched the absolute numbness spreading through my chest. Walking into a police station to officially report your own flesh and blood for a federal financial crime is an experience that permanently alters your brain chemistry. You cross an invisible boundary line, and you can never ever go back. The air inside the precinct smelled like stale, burnt coffee, harsh industrial floor cleaner, and decades of human misery. I bypassed the main desk and asked specifically for the Financial Crimes Division. I was escorted to a cramped, windowless office where I sat across a battered metal desk from Detective Vance. He was a seasoned, tired-looking veteran who looked like he had seen every possible, twisted variation of human greed and betrayal. He did not offer me a warm smile. He offered me a notepad and a pen. I laid the documents out on the scratched metal table between us, lining them up with the meticulous precision of a senior corporate auditor. I walked him through the timeline. I showed him the forged application. I showed him my pristine credit report. I showed him the wire transfer receipts proving the $60,000 went directly to a high-powered, incredibly expensive criminal defense law firm located in Stamford. Detective Vance did not show much outward emotion, but when he leaned in and closely examined the incredibly sloppy, tracing paper forgery of my signature on the primary loan document, he slowly shook his head in absolute, undeniable disgust. He leaned back in his creaky office chair, crossed his arms over his chest, and looked me dead in the eye. He explained to me the cold, brutal, unyielding reality of the legal situation I was initiating. He told me that this was not a simple family dispute that could be resolved over a tense Thanksgiving dinner. This was a severe felony. It involved wire fraud, identity theft, and massive bank fraud. He warned me that pursuing a federal lawsuit or pushing for severe criminal charges against my own parents would permanently, violently destroy the family unit. He asked me, with complete seriousness, if I was emotionally prepared for the absolute reality of seeing my own mother and father handcuffed, prosecuted, and potentially facing serious time in a federal prison. I did not blink. I did not look away. I looked right back at Detective Vance and told him that they had already destroyed our family unit 3 years ago when they maliciously sold my financial future and my perfect credit score to protect a criminal. I told him I was not their son anymore. I was their victim and I demanded full prosecution. I signed the official, binding police report. I handed over my spotless credit history. I gave the department absolutely everything they needed to start issuing immediate subpoenas to the banking institution. When I finally arrived at Sterling Financial later that morning, the corporate environment felt completely different. The polished marble floors, the quiet hum of productivity, the respectful nods from my colleagues, it all felt like a safe harbor. I felt incredibly light. I had the brown manila envelope tucked securely under my arm. I walked to my desk, booted up my computer, and began working on a highly complex corporate tax audit. I was completely, deeply focused. I was in total control of my environment and my future. But toxic, manipulative people absolutely despise losing control. They cannot handle a vacuum of power. They cannot comprehend a reality where their primary target suddenly stops responding to their demands. By 10 o'clock in the morning, my cell phone began to light up on my desk. First, it was my mother. I watched the screen flash her name, watched it ring until it went straight to my voicemail. Then my father called. Then Julian called from his phone. They called in a frantic, relentless, highly aggressive digital drumbeat. When I completely ignored the endless barrage of phone calls, the text messages started pouring in, vibrating against the wood of my desk. The messages oscillated wildly between explosive rage and deeply calculated emotional manipulation. One text from my father read that I was a pathetic coward for hiding from my responsibilities and that I needed to act like a real man. The very next text from my mother begged me to just come home, eat a nice dinner, and talk about the $1,600 rent increase like rational, loving adults. Julian texted me a single emoji of a clown face. They had absolutely no idea that I knew about the real estate fraud. They had no idea I had just spent 2 hours with a financial crimes detective. They just thought the obedient, quiet ATM had temporarily malfunctioned and simply needed to be kicked a few times to start dispensing cash again. They thought I was just throwing a minor tantrum over a rent increase. Their arrogance was so profound, so deeply ingrained in their psychology, that it blinded them to the massive legal avalanche hanging right over their heads. At exactly 11:30 in the morning, the internal intercom on my desk buzzed sharply. It was Jenny, our firm's front desk receptionist. Her voice was uncharacteristically tight, anxious, and highly stressed. She told me that I had 3 visitors in the main corporate lobby who were aggressively claiming a massive family emergency. She said they were completely refusing to leave until I came down, and they were being incredibly loud, causing a major disturbance and alarming the wealthy corporate clients waiting in the seating area. I took a slow, deep, highly calculated breath. The moment had finally arrived. The final confrontation. I picked up the brown manila envelope. I walked out of my quiet, secure office, down the long, carpeted hallway, and stepped into the sprawling, glass-walled lobby of the financial firm. It was a scene designed specifically, intentionally, for maximum psychological intimidation. My parents were standing right in the absolute center of the massive room, intentionally taking up as much physical space as possible. My father, Arthur, was wearing his favorite, slightly faded golf polo. He was sweating slightly under the bright lobby lights, his face locked in a deep, dark scowl of self-righteous, explosive anger. He was pacing back and forth aggressively, acting as if he owned the entire corporate building and everyone inside it. My mother, Martha, was standing near the expensive mahogany reception desk, wearing her heavily branded, expensive country club outfit. She was aggressively sighing, holding a crumpled tissue to her face, making absolutely sure every single passing corporate employee knew she was a deeply distressed, heartbroken matriarch suffering terribly because of her incredibly cruel, rebellious son. She was giving the performance of a lifetime. And then there was Julian. My older brother was leaning casually against a massive marble pillar, looking completely detached from the severe reality of the situation. He actually had his smartphone out, held high at an angle, and was casually recording a video vlog for his imaginary followers. He was probably actively planning to post a highly edited video later that evening about the extreme burdens of dealing with toxic family drama and how it was negatively affecting his creative entrepreneurial energy. When their eyes finally locked onto me emerging from the hallway, they moved like predators spotting a wounded, isolated animal. They rushed forward together, completely ignoring the highly professional corporate setting, ignoring the large security guards stationed by the doors, and ignoring the dozen senior corporate employees walking past them. They truly thought they had successfully cornered me. They thought this was the grand, dramatic reunion where they would finally break my spirit through sheer public humiliation. "There he is," my father boomed, his loud, aggressive voice echoing violently off the high glass ceilings. "You think you can just turn off your phone and ignore your own family, Ethan? You think you can just walk out on your financial responsibilities without a single word? My mother immediately rushed forward, reaching out with her manicured hands to grab my arm and dig her nails in. I took a sharp, fast step back, completely refusing to let her touch my physical person. She let out a massive, highly dramatic gasp, clutching her chest, playing directly to the audience of receptionists and passing financial executives. "Ethan, please," she wailed loudly, her voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. "We have been worried absolutely sick about you. You just disappeared into the dark night. We are your family. You cannot just abandon the house and the rising expenses. We desperately need your salary to keep the household running smoothly. Julian has crucial, time-sensitive investments he needs to make this week for his brand launch." Julian stopped recording for a split second, putting his phone down by his side but keeping the camera app open. "Seriously, bro," he said, using that incredibly arrogant, highly condescending tone he always exclusively reserved for me. "Stop throwing this ridiculous, childish tantrum. You are embarrassing yourself in front of your little office friends. Just transfer the money right now, come back home, and we can pretend this entire stupid, rebellious phase never happened. I have a massive brand launch coming up and I absolutely cannot deal with your negative, toxic energy right now." I stood perfectly, incredibly still. I looked at the three of them standing there in my professional workspace. I saw the absolute, blinding arrogance in their eyes. They were so incredibly confident in their own twisted, manufactured reality. They truly, genuinely believed I was just a rebellious teenager acting out, instead of a fully grown man, a senior corporate auditor who had finally audited his own miserable life. They thought they held absolutely all the cards. They thought my deep, conditioned fear of public confrontation would force me to immediately surrender my paycheck just to make them stop yelling. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Liam, my incredibly arrogant corporate coworker, slowly walking into the lobby holding a fresh coffee cup. He stopped a few feet away, a massive, highly satisfied grin spreading across his face. He was absolutely loving this spectacle. He thought he was witnessing the spectacular public destruction of my professional career. I looked back at my father, meeting his aggressive stare with absolute, freezing indifference. "The household expenses are no longer my problem," I said calmly, my voice projecting clearly and evenly across the quiet, tense lobby. "And there will be no more bank transfers. Ever." My father's face turned a dangerous, violent shade of crimson. He took a fast, threatening step toward me, raising his thick finger right toward my face. "You ungrateful, selfish little brat. We gave you absolutely everything. We sacrificed our entire lives for you, and when your older brother needs a tiny bit of financial help, you turn your back on us? I will drag you back to that house myself if I have to." He was operating on pure, unchecked, narcissistic ego. He thought he was the ultimate, unquestionable authority in the room. He had absolutely no idea he was standing directly on a massive, buried landmine, and my foot was hovering right over the trigger, ready to press down. "You did not sacrifice a single thing for me," I said, my voice cut through his aggressive yelling like a freshly sharpened knife. I did not raise my volume. I did not match his frantic, explosive energy. But the absolute, chilling certainty in my tone, the heavy, dark weight behind my words, made him freeze completely in his tracks. His raised finger slowly lowered. The sprawling corporate lobby went entirely, terrifyingly silent. Even the quiet, constant murmur of the reception desk stopped completely. Liam's highly smug, satisfied smile faltered slightly as he sensed the massive shift in the atmosphere. My mother slowly lowered her crumpled tissue. Her fake, theatrical tears completely vanished in an instant, replaced by a look of genuine, sudden confusion. The script they had rehearsed in the car ride over was suddenly falling apart. "What on earth are you talking about, Ethan?" My mother nervously laughed, a high-pitched, incredibly fake sound. She looked around rapidly at the watching corporate employees to ensure they still saw her playing the role of the reasonable, loving mother. "Stole from you? That is a ridiculous accusation. We gave you a beautiful place to live. We fed you every single day of your life. I did not argue with her absurd definition of care. I slowly, deliberately raised the crisp brown manila envelope. I unclasped the metal fastener. I pulled the small, heavy stack of printed documents out and held them firmly in my right hand. Exactly 3 years ago, I began, speaking very loudly and incredibly clearly so that every single person in the general vicinity could hear the absolute, unvarnished truth. You needed a massive, desperate amount of cash. You did not need it for organic groceries. You did not need it for the electric bill. You desperately needed $60,000 because Julian did not go on a magical, spiritual retreat to Europe to find himself. I turned my gaze directly onto my older brother. Julian got arrested for massive felony fraud, and you needed a high-powered, incredibly expensive criminal defense lawyer to keep your precious, golden child out of a federal prison cell. Julian's face went instantly chalk white. It was as if all the blood in his body had suddenly drained out through the floorboards. The arrogant, bored, deeply condescending expression melted completely off his face in a fraction of a second, replaced by sheer, unadulterated primal terror. He took a fast, stumbling step backward, bumping hard into the cold marble pillar behind him. He frantically shoved his smartphone deep into his pocket, his hands shaking violently. He looked rapidly around the room, his eyes darting frantically like a trapped rat desperately looking for an emergency exit. My father's heavy jaw dropped wide open. He tried to speak, to yell, to assert his dominance, but only a pathetic, breathless, incredibly weak stutter came out of his throat. How did you, where did you get? But you did not have the cash, I continued relentlessly, stepping one pace closer to my father, forcing him to look directly at the thick stack of papers in my hand. Your own credit was completely, totally destroyed from years of aggressively funding his ridiculous, unemployed lifestyle. So you committed a massive federal crime against your own blood. You went to your local bank branch. You took out a massive home equity line of credit against your suburban real estate. And you intentionally, maliciously forged my signature as the primary cosigner to secure the interest rate because my credit score was absolutely perfect. I aggressively slapped the printed PDF copy of the forged loan application directly onto my father's chest. He instinctively fumbled with it, grabbing the paper. His hands were shaking so violently that the paper audibly rattled in the quiet lobby. He stared down at the clumsy, jagged, highly illegal tracing of my name. You mortgaged my entire financial future, I said, the deep, suppressed anger finally vibrating heavily in my chest. You committed severe identity theft against your own youngest son to pay for the crimes of your oldest. And now the money is entirely gone. The loan is exactly 90 days delinquent. The bank is currently preparing for full real estate foreclosure. That is the exact reason why you suddenly demanded $1,600 a month via a text message. It was never about rent. It was the exact monthly installment on the massive debt you stole from me to save him. My mother let out a horrific, guttural, animalistic gasp. She stumbled backward violently, her high heels slipping on the polished marble. She had to violently grab the heavy wooden edge of the reception desk just to keep from collapsing entirely onto the floor. "Ethan, please," she whispered, her voice cracking with genuine, absolute, overwhelming panic. The theatrical mask was completely gone. "Please, I am begging you. Keep your voice down. People in the office are looking at us. We were just trying to protect the family unit. We had to help Julian. He is your brother. He has a future. He has a massive brand. A criminal record would have ruined his entire life." "And I don't?" I asked her. The question hung in the cold, heavily air-conditioned air of the corporate lobby. It was simple. It was sharp. And it was completely, utterly devastating. They did not answer me. They simply could not answer me. Their silence was the absolute, final confirmation of my entire existence in that family. My future was always expendable. Julian's future was always paramount. Suddenly, a calm, deeply authoritative, booming voice echoed down the main hallway behind me. "Is there a serious problem out here, Ethan?" I turned around slowly. It was Mr. Sterling, the highly respected CEO of the financial firm. He had walked out of his private executive elevator and had stood silently in the hallway, witnessing the entire second half of the brutal confrontation. He was flanked immediately by two massive, highly trained corporate security guards. He walked forward, looking at my parents and my brother with an expression of pure, icy professional disdain. "Mr. Sterling," I said, maintaining my rigid professional composure despite the massive amounts of adrenaline coursing fiercely through my veins, "I sincerely apologize for the public disturbance. These individuals were just leaving the premises. My father, deeply desperate and totally out of his depth in this high-powered environment, tried to appeal directly to my boss man-to-man. Sir, please, you need to understand the context here. This is a highly private family matter. My son Ethan is currently having a severe mental breakdown. He is confused. We are just trying to safely get him the medical help he desperately needs." Mr. Sterling did not flinch. He looked directly into my father's desperate eyes, his own gaze terrifyingly unforgiving. "I heard exactly what your son just said," Mr. Sterling stated, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Massive identity theft and federal real estate fraud are not private family matters. They are highly severe federal offenses. Ethan is one of my absolute brightest, most reliable senior analysts. If you or anyone in your family ever set foot inside my corporate building again, or if you ever attempt to harass my employee on company time, I will personally have my highly aggressive corporate legal team bury you so deeply in civil litigation you will never, ever see the light of day again. Security, escort these 3 individuals off the premises immediately. Do not let them stop to talk." The 2 massive security guards stepped forward instantly, moving with highly practiced, intimidating precision. I turned back to my parents for one final, defining moment. I pulled the second heavy document from the manila envelope. It was the officially stamped, officially filed police report from Detective Vance at the Financial Crimes Division. I shoved the thick packet of papers roughly into my mother's violently trembling hands. "I am absolutely not your retirement plan," I told them, my voice permanently devoid of any remaining affection, guilt, or loyalty. "I am not your personal silent ATM, and I am certainly not your illegal cosigner. The police currently have the absolute forensic evidence. The banking institution has been legally notified of the massive fraud. I highly suggest you sell whatever expensive camera equipment Julian has left and hire a real lawyer. A very good one this time. You are going to need it." I did not wait for their pathetic response. I did not stand there to watch the security guards physically herd my loudly sobbing mother, my hyperventilating, defeated father, and my completely silent, utterly terrified brother out the heavy sliding glass doors and into the cold street. I turned around, gave a deep, highly respectful nod to Mr. Sterling, and walked calmly back down the long hallway to my quiet desk. I had a highly complex corporate tax audit to finish before lunch. Let's pause for a moment. Thank you for staying with me this far, you're truly amazing. Please help me by liking the video and commenting the number 1 below so I know you've been here with me until this point. This not only helps more people discover this story, but also lets me know that my experiences mean something to someone. Your support is the greatest motivation for me to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The fallout from that explosive, highly public morning in the corporate lobby was not loud or dramatically violent. It was a slow, highly methodical, completely crushing implosion of their entire manufactured reality. I did not answer a single, desperate phone call from any extended relatives who tried to intervene. I permanently blocked every single phone number, email address, and social media account associated with my immediate family. I stepped completely out of the blast radius and let the cold, unfeeling federal legal system handle the heavy lifting. Exactly 3 months later, the massive banking institution officially foreclosed on the large, 4-bedroom suburban colonial house in Connecticut. Because of the massive, highly fraudulent second mortgage they took out in my name, the rapidly plunging real estate market value in their specific neighborhood, and the absolutely crippling legal retainer fees they now desperately face to keep themselves out of a federal prison cell, my parents walked away from that house with absolutely nothing. Zero equity. Zero savings. Their precious, highly guarded real estate investment was completely wiped off the map. They were violently forced to hastily pack their belongings and move into a cramped, poorly maintained, highly depressing two-bedroom apartment in a severely less prestigious, highly industrial zip code on the absolute edge of town. I heard briefly through the toxic family grapevine that my mother desperately told her former wealthy country club friends they had simply decided to downsize to simplify their lives and reduce their carbon footprint. Absolutely no one believed her pathetic lies. The social humiliation was absolute and complete. Julian's glorious, highly anticipated, high-end lifestyle rebrand never happened. Without my constant, reliable monthly financial subsidy to blindly fund his incredibly expensive organic groceries, his ridiculous luxury car rentals, and his massive, high-speed internet bandwidth, the visionary crypto entrepreneur quickly and violently collided with harsh, uncompromising reality. The very last update I heard from a mutual, highly amused acquaintance was that Julian was currently working exactly 40 hours a week at a miserable, brightly lit, highly depressing electronics kiosk sitting directly in the center of the local dying shopping mall. He is forced to wear a cheap, highly unflattering bright blue polo shirt uniform, and he spends his long, agonizing days aggressively trying to sell incredibly overpriced cell phone cases and cheap screen protectors to bored teenagers who completely, utterly ignore his supposed high-value influencer status. There is absolutely no rented Porsche in the mall parking lot. There is only the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lighting of minimum-wage retail life. It wasn't a cruel punishment I maliciously, actively inflicted upon him. It was simply the basic, undeniable mathematics of adult life finally catching up to him. Without a willing host to silently drain of resources, the parasite eventually had to learn how to walk on its own 2 feet or starve. But the most deeply satisfying, highly revealing moment of the entire aftermath did not involve my parents or my brother. It involved Aunt Susan. About 6 months after the massive lobby confrontation, I had just officially received a massive, highly lucrative promotion to senior risk manager at the firm. I was sitting comfortably in my highly secure, incredibly quiet downtown loft, deeply enjoying a fresh cup of premium coffee on a peaceful Sunday morning, when there was a frantic, aggressive, highly desperate knocking at my heavy wooden front door. The luxury building had a strict security desk, but she had somehow managed to cleverly sneak into the elevator bank closely behind a completely unsuspecting food delivery driver. I slowly opened the heavy door, keeping the security chain fully engaged, to find Aunt Susan standing alone in the hallway. She looked absolutely, completely terrible. Her usually perfectly cut and styled hair was messy, unwashed, and frayed. Her expensive clothing looked deeply rumpled, as if she had slept in it. The fake, folksy, highly patronizing smile she always wore in our kitchen was completely, entirely gone, heavily replaced by an expression of desperate, primal panic. "Ethan," she gasped loudly, aggressively trying to push her physical weight against the door to force her way into my private apartment. I held my arm firmly across the doorframe, physically blocking her entry with absolute ease. "What exactly do you want, Susan?" I asked coldly, my voice completely devoid of any familial warmth. She immediately burst into highly dramatic, heavy tears, aggressively reaching out through the small gap to grab the fabric of my shirt. "Ethan, you absolutely have to help me. You are the only one in the family making really good corporate money now. Arthur and Martha, they completely ruined me. They destroyed my life." I raised a single eyebrow, keeping my posture incredibly rigid and highly defensive. "Explain yourself. When the bank officially foreclosed on their house, and the federal police started investigating the identity fraud, your father came crying to me?" She sobbed uncontrollably, aggressively wiping her running nose with the back of her hand. "He begged me for a massive personal loan to pay for their elite criminal defense lawyers. He completely swore on his life he would pay me back the moment they sold the house. But the bank took absolutely everything. They legally drained my entire joint savings account. Ethan. They took the massive college fund I had carefully set up for my own kids. My husband found out yesterday, and he is actively threatening me with a highly vicious, incredibly public divorce because I secretly gave away our entire life savings to save Julian from prison. You have to give me a massive loan, Ethan. Just a small financial bridge loan to keep my fragile marriage together. You owe the family. You owe me for trying to keep the peace. I stared at her through the narrow gap in the doorway. This was the exact same woman who had coldly, viciously told me on the phone in that dark parking lot to stop complaining like a child and simply pay the massive extortion money. This was the woman who absolutely knew about the federal fraud all along, who clearly knew Julian was a convicted criminal, and who actively, maliciously tried to force me to be the silent sacrificial lamb to completely protect their toxic, highly illegal ecosystem. And now, precisely because the violent beast she had willingly helped feed had finally turned around and viciously bitten her, she fully expected me to act as her personal financial savior. I do not owe this toxic, highly abusive family a single damn thing, I said softly, my voice completely even. You actively helped build that massive house of cards, Susan. You handed them the glue. Now you get to live directly in the wreckage. I stepped back deliberately, looked her dead in the terrified, wide eyes, unhooked the chain for a fraction of a second, and firmly slammed the heavy wooden door directly, violently in her face. I immediately engaged the heavy steel deadbolt with a loud, highly satisfying click. I stood completely still and listened to her sob loudly in the hallway for exactly 2 minutes before the building security guard finally arrived and forcefully escorted her off the private premises forever. That same evening, as the bright, beautiful city lights flickered warmly outside the large, floor-to-ceiling windows of my spacious loft, I sat down comfortably at my clean kitchen island. It was completely, beautifully silent. There were absolutely no aggressive demands for my hard-earned money. There were no heavy car keys being violently thrown at my head. There was just the gentle, highly comforting hum of my own expensive refrigerator, a refrigerator I had proudly bought with my own honest corporate salary, filled completely with healthy food I personally chose to eat. I opened my laptop. I did not log into my various bank accounts to anxiously check for fraudulent, illegal charges. I did not check my pristine credit score out of sheer, deep-seated panic. I opened a highly specific, carefully hidden Excel file I had meticulously created months ago during my darkest hours in the dining room. I had accurately titled the file The Ledger. Inside that digital spreadsheet, I had meticulously, obsessively listed every single solitary financial contribution I had ever made to my parents and my brother over the last 5 excruciating years. I had listed the massive monthly rent payments, the highly inflated utility bills I was forced to cover, the incredibly expensive organic groceries, the emergency car repairs I fully funded, the high-speed internet upgrades, and the endless, random personal loans to Julian that were never, ever repaid. In column A, the detailed numbers stretched down the screen for hundreds and hundreds of rows, totaling a staggering, deeply sickening, massive amount of money. In column B, directly adjacent to the expenses, I had originally planned to carefully list the return on my massive investment. The genuine emotional support, the basic, fundamental gratitude, the warm feeling of safety and unconditional love a functional family is supposed to naturally provide. Column B was completely, entirely, permanently blank. Not a single entry. We are constantly, relentlessly taught by mainstream society, by highly romanticized movies, and by highly manipulative relatives that permanently cutting off your own toxic family is the ultimate, unforgivable failure. We are aggressively told that blood is thicker than water, that it is an act of unspeakable, deeply selfish cruelty to legally and emotionally walk away from the people who physically raised you. But that is a massive, highly dangerous, deeply toxic lie told exclusively by the people doing the taking. When one side gives absolutely everything, their hard-earned money, their physical labor, their mental sanity, their perfect credit score, and the other side gives absolutely nothing but endless, highly aggressive demands and illegally forged signatures, that isn't a family relationship. It is an emotional and highly illegal financial embezzlement scheme. Sometimes the absolute most profound, deeply loving thing you can possibly do for yourself, and ironically even for them, is to permanently, forcefully stop funding the massive dysfunction. By completely, legally closing the Bank of Ethan, I forcefully forced them to finally face the devastating, highly uncompromising reality of their own balance sheet. I forced them to actively live within their actual limited means, both emotionally and financially. Maybe sitting miserably in that cramped, depressing apartment, they will finally learn the concept of personal accountability. Maybe Julian will finally learn the actual value of a hard-earned dollar standing at that miserable mall kiosk. Or maybe they will just remain deeply bitter, angry, and resentful forever. But the absolute, undeniable beauty of my new, highly secure life is that their personal growth, or their ultimate failure, is absolutely no longer a variable in my mathematical equation. I realized sitting there, staring at the bright screen, that genuine self-worth is not something you have to actively, constantly earn by continuously overpaying your dues to people who deeply disrespect you. You absolutely cannot mathematically buy your way into being genuinely, unconditionally loved. You cannot lease basic human respect on a monthly payment plan. Self-worth is a highly valuable, inherent asset you already completely own from the exact moment you are born into this world, and it is your absolute sole responsibility to aggressively, legally protect it from anyone who tries to treat it like a highly liquid asset to constantly drain for their own selfish benefit. Breaking the horrific, generational cycle of severe financial and emotional abuse wasn't just about saving my perfect credit score or keeping my lucrative corporate promotion at the firm. It was the ultimate, defining, highly empowering act of self-love. It was the exact, perfect moment I looked in the mirror and finally decided that my own future, my own happiness, and my own absolute peace of mind were finally worth heavily investing in. I looked at the massive, staggering total at the absolute bottom of the digital spreadsheet. The heavy physical weight of that specific number had defined my entire miserable existence for so incredibly long. I dragged my mouse and highlighted the entire digital document. I did not save a backup copy to a hard drive. I did not cautiously archive it in a hidden desktop folder just in case. I firmly pressed the delete key. The massive wall of numbers completely vanished in an instant. The screen went pure white. It was just basic pixels on a digital monitor, but it felt exactly like taking a massive, deep, life-saving breath of clean oxygen after being violently held underwater for 27 long years. I was sitting completely alone in my large apartment, but for the very first time in my entire adult life, I wasn't lonely. I was completely, undeniably solvent. I was heavily protected. I was safe. If you are listening to my voice right now, and you have ever had to completely, brutally audit your own toxic family just to actively save your own sanity, or if you are currently drowning in the heavy, manufactured guilt of setting necessary, rigid boundaries with highly abusive parents, I desperately need you to hear this loud and clear. You are absolutely not a retirement plan. You are not a convenient college fund for a lazy, entitled sibling. You are not a human walking ATM machine. You are a highly valuable person who fundamentally deserves respect simply for existing. Stop paying the emotional ransom. Have you ever faced something similar with your own family? Have you ever had to bravely walk away to save yourself from absolute ruin? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. Stay strong, aggressively protect your peace, and I'll see you in the next video.